I call to order the Lisle Library District Personnel and Policy Committee meeting for August 5th, 2020 at 7:00 p.m. The Lisle Library District recognizes Governor Pritzker's Executive Order number 2020-07 and the Government Emergency Administration Act number 100-06-40, which suspends certain requirements of the Open Meetings Act, allowing library trustees to participate remotely during this pandemic. Roll call, please.
Marjorie Bartelli.
Here.
Thomas Duffy.
Here.
Thomas Hummel.
Here.
Emily Swistek.
Here.
Tatiana Weinstein.
Here.
Beth McQuillan. Here.
Okay. Item number 2 on the agenda is opportunities for visitors to speak. There are no visitors to speak, so moving on to item number 3, approve minutes of the February 21st, 2020 Personnel Policy Committee meeting. Do I have a motion?
This is Trustee Duffy. I move to approve the minutes of the February 21st, 2020 Personnel Policy Committee meeting.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? No? Okay, seeing none, roll call, please.
Thomas Duffy.
Aye.
Marjorie Bartelli.
Aye.
Thomas Hummel.
Aye.
Emily Swistek.
Aye. Okay, motion passes. Moving on to item number 4, LLD Outstanding Check Measures Policy 716 new draft discussion. So I'm going to turn it over to the director.
Okay, this is the new policy, yes, 716. This is a clean draft because it is completely new, and it's a policy that our auditor, Lauterbach and Amen, recommended. They provided the template, and we adjusted the language. We did have procedures in place for outstanding checks, but just never had a written policy, so we drafted one per our firm's recommendations. Pretty short and sweet. We can walk through it. It's just a purpose. The purpose is to ensure accurate cash reporting and management. There are 2 sections, one being notifications, the second being actions. I did find one mistake at the very last sentence. It says per state statute, and we're missing a T there. So I can adjust that. Were there any questions about this policy?
I didn't have any. I thought it was very straightforward. I don't know if any other trustees have any comments. Tom Hummel?
Just a question on the for the check outstanding that's more than 6 months. Is there like a minimum dollar amount that we, at least for sending the letter?
They didn't specify a minimum dollar amount. I just think if there's any check outstanding, this is the practice.
Okay. And then when it says the payee will have 30 days to claim the outstanding check, which would be after the letter was sent, what's going to be the process? Are we going to stop payment on that check?
It says it in number 2. Did you see in number 2? It says where the check's going to be. It's going to go into the LLD's unclaimed liability account.
Oh, but I guess so. Is it just more for like internal accounting, or is it or is this anything to do with? I guess I was asking more from a banking perspective. Like the check will still technically be outstanding, but so just a reminder to cash the check is what the letter will be.
For the payee, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine, because I know it's probably good. I mean, I know what my work we have on clean property too. So that's the first set of questions were more in, like from a banking perspective. The only thing, although I'm sure most of our checks are made out to businesses and individuals in Illinois, what if there's a check that's sent to somebody out of state? Would their unclaimed property laws be applicable? Because that's usually what the case is. I don't know if you want to add language there. I mean, this is probably at least good enough to start. Or if like something like say you send a check to somebody in Ohio, like a business, probably like the state of Ohio.
Follow the
unclaimed property.
taxing procedures, but I mean, I can look into that.
Okay. So that's the only question I had on that.
Okay.
Most states are 3 years. There's some with 5 year, but most are 3. But
So this used to be 7 years and it changed to 3 years.
mhm.
And then I think the answer to Tom is regardless of where we're sending the check, if it's unclaimed funds, it goes back to the state of Illinois.
And then someone would have to follow the procedures to claim that check. But I will look into that via our auditor. I mean, we just kind of filled in the blanks of what they provided us, but that's a good question. You can ask.
Any other comments or questions?
No.
So barring the answer to those questions, President Hummel, are we collectively okay with moving this forward to the board meeting next Wednesday?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so barring that, then Tatiana, move it forward, okay? And so maybe that'll be in addition, something in there, or she'll just clarify it for us at the meeting next Wednesday.
If it's necessary, yes.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so moving on then to item number 6, LLD Pandemic Response Policy 606, new draft discussion. I will also turn this over to the director to discuss that.
We,
ahead.
we skipped an item, I believe.
Oh, I
Sorry.
did? What did I skip? Oh, 605.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Item 5. Apparently I'm trying to rush through the meeting.
Evelyn, we can hurry it up if you'd like. That's fine.
LLD Emergency Closure of Library Policy 605 draft discussion. I will turn it over to the director on the correct policy. Thank you for catching that.
Okay, this is our general emergency closure policy. And before it was just called the library closing policy, which really didn't equate to what it referred to. So we're renaming it the emergency closure of library policy 605. And this new draft fleshes out our current policy, which was not only short, but inadequate in detail. And this covers all types of emergencies, whether it's a flood, a snowstorm, a pandemic, etc., in general terms. So there's a lot new here. It's divided up into the introduction, and then it's divided into notifications and procedures for more detail and more clarity. And then there's a caveat at the end. So I don't know, do we want to go through everything line by line, or were there any questions about specific lines? Tell me how you want to walk through these.
I don't know how, I can't speak for the other committee members. I read through it myself and I felt like it was very clear and really, flushed out the information that was lacking before. And I feel comfortable with it now. I don't know how the other committee members feel.
This is Vice President Bartelli. I believe you covered Director Weinstein. Item 2, letter E. I did previously have questions regarding it's how they would be paid. And you did send an email a couple hours ago addressing the employees who travel, so on and so forth. You do mention eligible employees shall utilize PTO for the 14-day quarantine.
Oh,
Which-
that's the next policy though. That's
the
606.
policy?
That's the
I'm
one I was
sorry.
trying to skip ahead to.
Okay, that's
So let's hold that until the next policy.
okay. Then on that same issue though, on 2E, when you indicate it would be paid the hours they were scheduled to work, would that be for that particular pay period? Is there any length of time? So we're all scheduled to work, but is that 40 hours a week? Is it for that particular, I mean, how do you I have a problem with for the hours they were scheduled to work.
So it says, the original policy, it really doesn't migrate away from the original sentence that says employees scheduled to work on a day that the library closes due to an emergency shall be paid for the hours they were scheduled to work for the day. So if there was a power outage and we had 20 staff scheduled to work that day, those staff for that day would be scheduled to work. And then it goes on that the director will assess staff responsibilities and operations communications. And that's really dependent on the type of closure. This is more of a broad policy that talks about closures in general, and then we'll move into the pandemic policy and talk about extended closures.
Thank you. I think I'm kind of mixing the two, just the closure and the pandemic. So thank you.
Trustee
I have
Duffy, you look
one
like you want to
question.
say something. There you go.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. More just a quick little clarification, and this question is more directed towards President Hummel and Tatiana. So, emergency happens, right? And really, not every emergency is the same. Some may call for an immediate closure. Some may call for a consultation with President Hummel to get to that closure of it. The first sentence of the whole document, the whole policy basically is talking in consultation with an officer of the board, first being President Hummel. But then the notification section, 1A, says the LLD director shall notify the board president of the emergency closure. So as I read that sentence, it is the director has already closed the library and now is notifying the president of the board of that, as opposed to consulting with the board on the closure of the library. Now, I think what you want is it vague, because basically if an emergency is where you got to close, in other words, you don't want to call the president and go, hey, the library is on fire, should I close it or not? You just want to close it. But I think like there is a, maybe that first sentence when applicable, or, you know, maybe we could provide a little more coverage to say it really is at the director's discretion in an emergency situation because you're there. And you, so that was the only question I had on this section. I understand what you're trying to do. I have no problem with it. I just think we want to provide a little more coverage for the director to have that leeway.
Mm-hmm.
So when I wrote this, as you can see in black, the original language basically stayed the same. And then when I started dividing it up under notifications and then procedures, letter A, I'm like, well, I should put something in there because the number one notification is I communicate with the board president. So it was just kind of like a fill in the slot, because I wanted to make sure that under notifications there was that communication listed.
Mm-hmm.
But what you're saying is that there's a little bit of a disconnect if there's an emergency where I cannot, it has to be immediate, where there's maybe a shooter or something like that. So I can shore up that language if everybody else is okay with that.
I think that makes sense, you know, because as Trustee Duffy said, you know, they're not exactly sending the same message, that first sentence in the paragraph and then that 1A, and that we do want to make sure that they are in sync, especially so then that, you know exactly what you're supposed to be doing, right? Any
yeah,
other?
I don't have.
Okay.
So I don't have. Yeah, that was my only comment to that. And again, it's really just about empowering the staff. Don't, if there's an emergency, you
Right.
just want to be able to handle that first. You don't want to come in conflict with the policy that we have.
Right. Okay. Any other questions or concerns about this policy 605, the edits? No? Okay, so if the director can work on that 1A, that statement that's there, are we comfortable with her bringing it to us at the board meeting next week to vote on as an entire board, and we can talk about that edit at that time?
Yes.
Does that work for everyone? Okay,
Sounds good.
so we will move 605 for action at the next meeting. Okay, now we can get to item number 6, LLD Pandemic Response Policy 606 new draft discussion.
Okay, so this is an entirely new policy. It's timely, it's specific to widespread pandemics that affect library operations as well as patron and staff and the overall community health. A lot of the documentation here comes straight from the actions I implemented as of March 13th, as well as some best practices that have come from conversations with other library directors and during Zoom calls and things like that. I also reviewed a number of just disaster policies online just to get some assistance with some language that's been used. So policy 606 would come directly after the LLD emergency closure policy that we just discussed. And we're calling it pandemic response. And this policy has 4 categories. It starts with readiness measures, then communication actions, operational adjustments while open during a pandemic, and then lastly, operations when we are temporarily closed. So everything is new here, and I don't want to read it verbatim, but if we want to go section by section, and if there's questions, I'm ready for you.
So, well, and this is the one that Marjorie was asking the question on with the addendum that you emailed us to us a few hours ago about 3L.
Yeah.
Marjorie, did you want to ask your question on that now, or did anyone have anything about from 1 and 2 first that they felt like they needed to discuss, or are we clear on 1 and 2?
I'm happy to hold my question.
Okay, thank you, Marjorie.
The only quick question is actually just with even the title of the policy, pandemic response. Should we make it like pandemic and epidemic response? Because you could have something besides a pandemic. I know we're getting into like literal terms, but I'm
But it could be more local.
Yes, I'm
Yeah.
okay with pandemic, but if you wanted to really make it more, I guess, literal or specific, I don't know if you want epidemic as well in there, pandemic, outbreak, all those terms, but I don't know. It's not a huge thing.
I think that makes a good point, though. I mean, we could make it epidemic/pandemic response. I mean, yeah, I think that makes sense to include that in there because it doesn't have to be a pandemic to enact this policy. We could have a local epidemic that would necessitate it. So that's a good point.
If you really want to keep it very broad, just say public health response or public health, something to that effect, because it may not, there could be a lot of different ways, but it keeps it vague enough.
So like a public health emergency response, do you think emergency would be a good word, or do you think something not as strong as emergency?
You could put emergency in there. I know we have emergency in a lot of stuff, but I think public health response is probably an appropriate, because this is honestly what this whole document is it's just a public health document where you're outlining how you're handling the health of the public that you're in charge of.
So public health response type, that's our policy? Okay. Public health response. Got it.
Okay, so then if we're doing that, then do we need, so the first paragraph, the description of it talks about during a pandemic, if an official pandemic is declared. So should we change that verbiage to be, broader?
Yes, I would change it to where it says pandemic, just put it as public health emergency.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, any other comments with that beginning then opening paragraph?
No.
In the title of the policy? Okay, So what about section 1, the readiness measures? Did we have any questions or concerns about those?
Am I supposed to talk about bathroom cleaning right now? No, I know what you were doing.
That's in there.
Okay, so then 2, communications to the public, LLD board and staff. Any questions or concerns about that section?
No, I don't have any issues because we addressed it in the paragraph, in the first paragraph where it says official recommendations by public health authorities. So that was an issue. I thought, oh, should we have something in here about how it aligns to what is being told by the public health authorities? But we already say it up front, so up top,
Okay.
so there's no reason to add it.
Okay, Marjorie, do you have anything for that one, that second section?
Well, then item letter H rather.
Mhm.
Would it be necessary there to include the addendum email as far as we would instruct staff to stay home when sick, of course. In the addendum, is it the 3L, Director Weinstein, does item 2, I'm trying to say, is it necessary in this public health emergency policy to state how employees will be paid? Is that something that would be covered in another policy as far as, let me just say, during this current pandemic, I have fielded some questions. I think we brought this up before, maybe at a board meeting. Just general questions about, was the entire staff paid? So where would that be addressed?
So that was addressed in the closure policy where there's a assessment. So in any policy like this, it's dependent on the length of time. I mean, we can't, unless the board wants to, or the committee wants to go through all the scenarios that may come about in terms of length. So that's why it was addressed a little more generally in the closure policy in consultation with the board president and dependent on the length of time. And as far as the pandemic was concerned, yes, the staff was paid. And during the kind of evolution of the closure, we had staff working in shifts and working remotely, and then moving into working internally in the building. And while we were closed, we had staff who were scheduled to come in, including myself, to make sure that the building was operating. We were continuing to pay our bills and things like that. And that's just for this particular closure. And again, it can change. So when writing a policy, I think we want to be a little broad in terms of, I don't think we can capture every scenario. And in this part of the policy, we're looking at section 2, which is communications to the public, board, and staff. And so letter H, where you began, is really just about communication.
Right.
Not about payment. And then in terms of payment, when you're talking about travel and things like that, in terms of operational adjustments, that's when we get into letter L and talk about travel restriction.
Okay.
But if the committee wants to discuss other things about that, I'm open to that. But I think I don't think we can account for every scenario or every length of time. And it's really dependent on the type of closure and pandemic and or emergency or disaster.
Okay. I'm good with that. Thank you.
Are we talking about the addendum that you sent right now? I apologize. I was following, but I know
we were finishing up on 2 because we were talking about 2H. So if anyone has any other, does anyone have any other comments on section 2? Or are we good to move on to 3?
Yes.
Looks like we're good to move on to 3. Okay, so we can move on to 3, which is the potential library operational adjustments while open. And this is where the addendum falls in, 3L, and then there's a 1 and 2 under that we received from the director earlier today. So this is where, Marjorie, your question would come in, unless Tatiana, do you want to fill some holes in first and then?
I wanted to state that the addendum came today because HR Source, who we contract with for some human resources assistance, sent a memo out yesterday. And things are coming out every day, and that's why you got this late today. But they sent something out late yesterday. If we were working on anything like this, to include it. So that's why it's here as a new item. But I think it makes sense, and I can imagine we'll see more of this scenario coming around when if someone goes and attends a wedding and say, a state that's a hot zone or things like that. So I think it's important to have that.
So then would, so since the email had this as 3L and the current 3L in the draft was establish new procedures as required /needed, that would move down to M then? We'd plug that in and then move that one down, shift that one down to M? Okay.
Okay.
So I guess when I read 3L, which is, I'm just gonna walk, it's gonna be a messy thinking, so just bear with me, Secretary Swistek. What if I traveled to Wisconsin a week before it's declared a no travel zone? And then, so this addendum doesn't really count. I guess in one way, I get to the spirit of what it's doing. In other words, it's saying if you have your own right to go to where you want to go, but we're protecting the health and safety of the employees. So thus, if you go to a state that is, or an area that is not, you don't really should travel there, we have to protect you. But what if I went 1 week before? In the truthfully, it was probably as dangerous as it was the week before as the week that it gets declared. But I would not have known. But technically underneath this policy, would I be held to it? And then if I am, what is the window at which the weeks go out, right? Like if it's 3 weeks before, what if I went to Wisconsin, didn't see another soul, and just slept on a beach for 3 nights, which, like there's differences here of it. And I say that, and I totally understand. I agree with the spirit of this, which is in essence, you don't want somebody to be careless, come back and not think about the health and safety of their colleagues and the patrons that are at the library. I think that we all agree with right now. That was my only thought when I read this. It's very prescriptive, and I get it, but I also I don't have a solution for it either. I racked my brain about how to come with it, but I wanted to say that as a thought when I saw this, because I mean so I'll stop there, and as that was word soup, so I apologize.
Well, I mean, I think that's a good point. And if you wanted to throw in within a 1 month window of the declaration, I mean, you could do something like that. If the goal is to create a kind of a safety bubble for those who are traveling, and for those people would be encountering at the library, we we could do something like employees who travel out of state to out-of-state locations that have been deemed hotspots by government or have been deemed hotspots within a 1-month window by government. I mean, that's a long sentence. We could put them in parentheses. I mean, I don't know. If you want to put a window or a range around that declaration of hotspot.
Was the recommendation that you got from HR source, how was that worded? Was it worded like what you gave us, or was it worded differently?
They didn't provide a template, but they did
Okay.
provide this guidance. So they stated basically, have something in writing that says if employees travel out of state, that they first must notify their superior or supervisor of it. Talk about the consequences of not alerting your supervisor, and then talk about PTO and how you want them to, you know, is it vacation? Is it strictly sick time? Is it a combination of both? And that's all they really recommended is those
Okay.
points. But they did say the 14 days, that was strict.
Right.
And the fact that they should.
Okay.
But we can enhance this in any way we like. I know that the city of Chicago has mandated this.
Mm-hmm. And DuPage County is encouraging it. They haven't mandated it, but they're encouraging it. Yeah. I mean, I think it's important that we put it in there. I'm thinking about what Trustee Duffy said about, you know, the window of time that we're looking at for when they have traveled. It's a tough situation to be in, right? Like, because what if it is the day before the travel ban is, you know, enacted, or that becomes a hot spot, then, you know, what do we say? Oh, well, you missed it by a day, so you're fine. Or do we say, no, you were there when it was getting to the point where it was becoming a hot spot, and so you still need to be quarantined? I think it is a tough call to make there. So I think that maybe we should add something in there to specify, you know, that it could be the leading up to that time, leading up to it becoming a hot spot too, just to cover that, because it clearly was, cases were increasing if it was then becoming, you know, deemed a hot spot.
And actually, I mean, I threw out a month, but we could use the 2-week window because it is a 2-week quarantine. And if it's 2
Okay.
weeks around that declaration, that might, and again, nothing's going to be perfect regarding any of this,
Right.
any of these guidelines, but we're doing our best to try to safeguard everyone. And if we put in a 2-week window sentence there, I think that at least tries to accomplish our goal.
That makes sense to me. I don't know how the rest of the committee feels about adding in a 2-week in front of the being deemed a hot spot as part of the needing to quarantine. Vice
I
President
am
Martelli,
fine with.
or whoever. We're not all together, so it's kind of hard to be like, okay.
You go ahead, President Hummel.
I was gonna say, no, but you're talking like a 2-week quarantine if it's requested or required by the state or let's say the county, correct, or even the national government, I suppose too. But it wouldn't be something we just would implement on our own, would it?
Yes, that's what it's saying. It's saying that if, let's say Wisconsin was declared a hotspot by government and health agencies, we are instituting that if an employee travels there, that we are going to enforce the 14-day quarantine.
Okay.
This is what I guess I was thinking here. So what happens, right, is the employee tells, I work for Tatiana. I tell Tatiana that I'm going to go and travel to Texas. So first of all, I think every employee probably right now that is traveling out of state needs to tell their supervisor. And then if that location is determined to be a quote unquote hotspot, that on top of the 2 weeks, and this is where if you want to go the other way, where I said like I was a little washy, is you could say that after the 2 weeks, you have to go and get a test done. And you have to have that test done with a negative result after the 2 weeks. That would be the other, if you're taking the track of you really want to make sure, right? And that would be that's where you would want the test to occur. Or if you're saying that the 14 weeks is sufficient time, which I'm fine too with that, either or. And I'm fine with the 2 weeks looking back, because I think that's also a part of the conversation with your supervisor. I go, Tatiana, I'm going to Texas. And you go, well, Tom, there's a lot of cases down there where you're going. It's not considered a hotspot, but here's kind of where it's looking like right now. Be aware that if you go down there and then 2 weeks from now, but if from a week from now after you go and it's determined a hotspot, we got to immediately extract you from this location and you got to go back into quarantine and go from there. Maybe in the scenario where as I talk myself through this, is in that scenario, that's where the individual has to go get the test, because they've come back, then the location they were at was a hotspot, but then they've actually come back and worked, then you would want them to get the test done. If they normally go to a hotspot and come back and they're like, okay, I'm just going to take 2 weeks off anyways, then your quarantine time is fine and they don't need the test. So you're protecting the staff, but also you're kind of, I walked myself through there. I apologize, but it goes both ways. I think I get what I'm fine with it as it's written. We want to just do that. But I do think that in the situation where you could have someone go to a hotspot, come back to work, and then that hotspot is declared a hotspot 1 week later, and in reality, you now have someone that has a higher potential than your other employees of having that virus.
So to that point, the very last sentence in this policy does let us adjust anything. So it allows us to adjust any of the above to meet the needs of an emergency to ensure the safety, health, and general welfare of the public and staff. We can say which may include staff or a requirement to get tested or something.
Or
like
follow health guidelines or
something like that. I mean, this does allow for that. That's why I put that in there. So in that kind of scenario, we may say, Tom, you went to Texas. It's out of control now, and now you're back. So we're gonna say, you need to go home for the day, make an appointment, get tested, and let us know those results.
if there's a test.
Yeah, if there's a test.
I'm comfortable with that as, I don't want to be like, and I also agree, I don't want to have like a 30-step policy on every single thing. So I'm comfortable with that as long as, from my point of view, and this is more for Tatiana and Beth, as long as it's an open dialogue between the manager and staff member about, what the library stance is going to be versus the staff member and their vacation. As long as that's happening, I'm fine with it not being, I'm fine with what we've talked about adding into there, the addendum, and that's fine. I think it's more of just along the lines of, I don't want a staff member to be surprised by a test or a request of a test or, hey, you only have 4 PTO days and you're going to go on not paid for the next few more days because of everything else. So that's only my concern.
And that's the point of this, and that's why HR Source sent this to us, is to It's to really alert staff so that they know the consequences of going into these hotspots. So, you know, so that they're aware that if they decide to take the risk, there are some consequences to taking that risk, and these are those consequences.
Thank you for letting me work my thinking out verbally versus internally.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, are we comfortable with adding into 3L something about within 14 days, like 14 days after their return too? Is that what we talked, or before they go, whatever we said? Now I can't remember what we said.
Week window upon the declaration of a hotspot.
Okay. So we're gonna add in something about a window. Okay. And then at the end, adding in that which may include something further, and you'll add something to that, to the draft too, about where we talked about how they may be required to get a test or something like that.
Are we doing that? I didn't think we were. Are we?
I thought you said that for that last sentence where it says that may adjust.
Yeah, I said
And then,
we could do that, but I didn't know.
and then you said which may include, but I mean, if we don't want to stipulate that in the policy, that's fine with me. I just didn't know if you were talking about including that in there or not.
I offered it, but I don't know. I thought that Tom Duffy said that he was okay with it as is, but I'm happy to include it. So maybe the rest of the committee could let me know.
Marjorie, what do you think, Marjorie?
I don't think it's necessary. If I'm not mistaken, in the very beginning, we talked about this in the first paragraph about calling it a public health emergency versus a pandemic. A public health emergency would not necessarily require a test. So I think we're a little bit ahead of the game.
Okay.
Is my comment.
Okay, thank you. President Hummel, do you have any?
I was actually going to maybe say something similar to what Marge said. Is, you know, I mean, like this current pandemic, you know, may require testing or 14-day windows. The next, you know, public health issue may not
Right.
need testing or whatever. So I would hold off on the testing.
Okay, okay,
Thank-
sounds good. Were there any other questions, comments, concerns with this new policy 606 public health response?
No, but it's a great idea. I'm glad we have it.
Okay. Okay, so are we comfortable moving this forward to the next board meeting next Wednesday as well with those edits that we talked about?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, so Tatiana, you've got that. All right, moving on. Next item on the agenda is LLD schedule of fines, fees, and financial transactions policy 325, which is talking about going fine free and draft discussion. So I'll turn it over to the director again to talk us through this.
Okay, so I've got a little bit of a lengthy intro before we walk through it. So originally back in February, if you remember, pre-pandemic times, we were looking at policy, and it was on the agenda specifically to enhance policy number 3B, where it discussed borrowing privileges, and all we were going to do is change the digital. We added the digital there, and that's the only reason we were going to take a look at this. However, since COVID-19, it's affected every household, it's affected our economy. I think it's an appropriate time to discuss going fine free. And many libraries have already gone fine free, and most recently, like ourselves, during the pandemic, have gone fine free temporarily. And some are continuing to go fine free. So in your packet on page 26, there's a list of libraries who took an online survey via Rails. And of the 63 libraries who submitted their answers, 54 of them have gone fine free, or they've already been fine free from the get-go. And about a third of those that answered are the temporaries, the ones who've gone temporarily fine free. That survey was put out on July 7th. And as of July 7th, many of the libraries who were temporaries are now going fine-free. And then breaking news yesterday, Downers Grove was one of the temporaries. They're going fine-free or have already. They're saying they're fine-free forever. So I know that begs the question of how much revenue is lost if we endeavor to go fine-free. So just to kind of put this in perspective, about 3 years ago, we looked at our fines, and the LLD had garnered about $40,000 in fines. About 2 years ago, we pulled in about $35,000 to $38,000 in overdue fines. And then this past 1920, we pulled in $17,000. And that was mostly, it reduced mostly due to, we had automatic renewals instituted, and so the fines went down there. So our numbers are already cut in half, and I did have staff look into other sources of revenue pre-pandemic, such as a passport program, because we did kind of sketch around the idea of going fine-free pre-pandemic. So we were looking into a passport program pre-pandemic, and post-pandemic, we can look into things such as like hunting and fishing licensing. We can look into selling branded, logo branded materials such as t-shirts and mugs. We haven't done that, and we can do that. I checked with our attorney on that. We can do that. And then continuing to look into the passport program, as well as we never really asked the Friends to give the library a percentage of the book sales, so we can look into writing up policy that would, you know, I don't even think we have it. We do have some written documentation of the relationship between the Friends and the library, but it's very old, and we can relook at that. So we can continue to look at other revenue generating sources to be sure. So that's kind of my introduction. And we can walk through the draft. The first part of it is an introduction that explains that eliminating overdue fines and fees does not mean there aren't any financial responsibilities. And then we have number 1, and it goes over the expectations under a fine-free model. Then number 2 documents the schedule of fines and fees. Number 3 discusses borrowing privileges, and number 4 discusses interlibrary loan fees. Number 5 discusses reciprocal fees, and number 6 is basically reworded. It's about credit card use. And then number 7 discusses waivers. So we can walk through it. What I'll say, you can talk about the introduction if you like the introduction, but at number 1, there is a question to you all on 1C regarding the unpaid bill costs on a patron's account. $35 is our current limit, but if we wanted to change that number, that is up for discussion. But I'll pass it back to Chairwoman Swistak if you want to walk us through or ask about questions about the sections.
Okay. Thank you, Director Weinstein. So in that first section then about the current limit of the $35, I'm trying to figure out how it would get to that amount if we were to go fine free, you know, because $35, I mean, I can imagine if you kept materials late, then it would just keep accruing, right? So this would more be like if you passed the 6 weeks and then they sent out the documentation that you were missing the material and it hadn't been returned and then they were charging you for it, correct?
Yeah, it would be hard to get there. It would be like lost materials, that can step in, damaged materials, things like that. So
Okay.
it would be hard to even get there. So upping the number, I mean, I think it would be just, I don't know if necessary.
Right. That's why I was wondering. Just, I mean, what would it take to even get someone to $35? I guess was my question.
Well, several looks if you lost the damage.
Okay. Okay. So I'm okay with it staying at the current limit of 35 then. I don't know how the rest of the committee members feel. Thoughts?
How many people? Oh, sorry, go ahead, President Hummel.
No, I was gonna say I'm okay with 35. And the only quick question, am I frozen on everybody's screen or is it just my screen?
No, you're frozen.
Frozen.
All right.
It's your internet.
It's not a bad image though. You at least froze well.
Smile, Tom.
Okay, so President Hummel said he was fine with the 35. Vice President Bartelli?
Yes, I'm fine. Thank you.
Trustee Duffy?
How many people, Tatiana, and I don't expect you to know this off the top of your head, so more of an estimate. How many people in a given year get to this 35 as kind of on their account?
Even less than 24?
Yeah, a handful.
Okay, so it's really, really small amount. Because, so if I'm reading this correctly, if I lose 2 books and they equate to $35, then I have to pay the $35. Still, because that's not a fine, like it's a replacement fee versus a fine.
Yeah.
I think that's the way I'm reading it, right?
Do that too. There's a lot
A lot of time.
Yeah, you've got the full renewal period as well as 10 weeks after that.
Mm-hmm. All right, so it's a really small amount. I'll tell you the only reason why I'm asking these questions is part of one of my thoughts has been as and I'm very much for the fine-free approach, is, you know, sometimes you have transient patrons who could lose a couple of books, but also would never be able to pay it back in that capacity. The question is, but I don't know if, I'm fine with 35. Because the fact that it's only a really small amount, but I would like to maybe, if we could track that for maybe the next year to see how many people reach that threshold, so that if we have to, we can always come back and maybe have a discussion on it. But I'm fine with 35 for now, since it's a very small number.
And Trustee Duffy, to your point, and we're not on this page yet, but at number 7, there is a waiver of fines possibility. And so it does say that it may be waived. So there is a little bit of wiggle room if needed in certain cases.
Yeah. No, I'm comfortable with it. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so that's talking about that maximum fine that someone would accrue if they had not returned a material. We've talked before about going fine free for overdue materials, and that's what this policy is talking about. Are we feeling comfortable with going in this direction of being fine free on overdue materials? Because I guess we need to come to some agreement on that before we could say we'll take this to the next board meeting for discussion and approval at the full board. So we need to see if we are all on the same page as far as that.
I do have one question for staff on this. What if, like, there's holds on books? I think there's some brief mention about this. If there's like a hold, especially like a new release that's very popular that might have several holds or like a waiting list of many people, how is that handled any differently? Is it just you're not allowed to renew it? Is that correct?
If there's a hold on an item, if I'm understanding you correctly, then there is no renewal.
Yeah.
You're supposed to return the material, in this case, what it would be 3 weeks. If you don't return it and there's people waiting, if staff will actually call and remind you, and if you tell you that people are waiting, and a courtesy call to please return the material.
Okay.
And that is true, because that has happened to me before.
Because I'm okay with being fine free. I guess the only concern would be is if something like that, if there's like if there's somebody waiting on these books, especially for like a new popular release. I don't know if you want to, I mean, this might get way too complicated, like maybe keep fines for like new releases. That might, I mean, I'm not, I don't have a strong opinion on it either way. I mean, I'm okay with just going fine free. The other, and I know there is definitely some statistics in the packet in relation to this next question I'm going to have, but what if we do start seeing an increase in like late returns? I mean, would we be open to maybe revisiting this policy? Because I don't know if we would want, you know, people starting just consistently like being overdue on their books. Again, if it's something that's not, it's going to wind up on the shelf, it's not a big deal. But if it's something where somebody's waiting for books, you know, that's the only question or the only concern or reservation I have, I guess, on this policy. But I don't know any answers or
Well, I guess the automatic renewals. So if there are holds, you can't renew. And it's very small. So, I mean, there are steps that staff take to try to retrieve popular materials.
And the example of other libraries that were in the packet shows that items, they didn't hold on to them
Yeah.
longer.
I mean, it was a nominal difference, very immaterial difference. But yeah, it's just like it would happen with our library. The other thing I know you mentioned in the introduction about like other revenue items, and I know we were talking about like license plate stickers and fishing licenses, and you still said passports. I mean, those are good. I know the director and I have talked about this in the last couple of months as well. I would probably try to prioritize on the license plate renewals if it's doable, because Secretary of State's office, I know the DMVs seem to be having long lines, and this could help alleviate some of that. I know you could do it online as well, but that might be a service that would work immediately. Same thing with probably fishing licenses, passports, because of the current situation. I don't know how much of demand there are on new passports. Hopefully, in the future there will be a demand again. So I mean, I don't have a problem going or doing passports, but I would probably focus on the first two possibilities, since there's probably a market on both of those right now. That's just the only comment I had on that. And elsewise, I think I'm okay with that. Like I said, I do have some minor concerns on some things, but overall, it's not worth holding it up. So I'm good with being fine free. And I did see Downers Grove, like you said the other day, went fine free as well.
So the staff have already started researching, as I've mentioned. As far as the fishing licenses and hunting licenses go, we have to get into a queue to become a vendor, and we've already done that. The license plate are next on our list. And I mentioned, we did look into some other things like garbage stickers and stamps and things like that. And you can't sell them outside of just their face value. So we can't sell them for anything more than what they are, those particular things. So we are looking at other sources of revenue generating opportunities.
I just wanted to add, President Hummel was talking about if something is on hold for someone else, for another patron, and you haven't returned it, the library staff does call you and let you know that someone is, it's overdue and someone else is waiting for it, and they ask you to please return it, at your earliest convenience. And which, I mean, it was very nice. I was kind of embarrassed when they called me to tell me that. It was before the pandemic. But I said that does happen. And as far as missing materials, I think that's, again, that has happened to me as well. We moved and one of the library books got packed in a pod and was stuck in it for 18 months. And so, we paid for it, which is fine. I mean, that was something that, that we did, but the whole procedure of it, that, it wasn't for a while until we got the official letter that said, okay, this book is now missing, you need to pay for it. I mean, it was a long chunk of time that had it not been in a pod for 18 months, we would have been able to, find it and get it back. So, I think that it's a really solid policy, and I'm pleased to see that we are, moving towards going fine free. I think that would be a great thing for the community and for our patrons. Vice President Bartelli, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I'm good with the policy.
Trustee Duffy, did you have any other comments?
3. So one,
Are we going through the other stuff?
no, sorry, I have 3 comments. One, which is I agree on the services, and I think we should do as many of these services as feasible to staffing that allows, because it really gets to the whole concept of it's a library moving into kind of that resource center mode, right? Like when you have all these different services and it's a one-stop shop, you're driving foot traffic into your location, and it would undoubtedly lead to a pickup in other services and library resources that we have. And if we have to make up $17,000 in general fees, I think a few of these, the renewals, the fishing and hunting license, whatever you want to call it, a combo of that is going to make up that small amount of money over time very easily. The one question I did, and so I'm definitely pro going the rule of the fine. The one question I had going back to collection letters, when a letter is sent, is it sent just to the name that is on the account? So in other words, will a child receive a collection letter? I just was asking that, and not that my son may or may not have a book that needs to be returned, but I was just wondering, do you kind of go through that process, oh, this is an adult, only the adult gets it?
Yeah, only adults.
Make them pay, but we make them pay with their toys.
I know, yeah. He'll choose, and he'll choose wisely. So no, okay, that is perfect. I'm good with what's in here.
Because ultimately the parent or guardian is the one who's responsible for the materials checked out on that card, and I'm sure you've seen this, Trustee Duffy, your son's library card, you or your wife were supposed to sign the back of the card that you were the official person responsible.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure, because I didn't
want to make sure that
make sure I'm not going to get a collection letter soon. So.
Been there. Okay. Any other comments or questions on this policy? Okay. So yes.
I did want to say, just on 2A, we did eliminate the fee for a lost or damaged card, because I think that was something that Trustee Duffy requested, so that was eliminated, along with the daily charges for overdue.
Okay. Okay, so are we good with putting forth this revised policy 325 to the board meeting next Wednesday? Yes, I'm getting some thumbs up. All right, so we will move this forward then with actually the only edit we had was the making it officially $35, because there was that question. But I think you did it on the brown copy. I think it had
Yes.
that it was 35. Okay.
Emily, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Vice President Bartelli. I have a question. I should know this, but I don't. On item number 4, what's the difference between the interlibrary loan and the reciprocal borrowing? Because we mentioned twice the loaning library. I don't understand. I thought they were one and the same.
Okay, so the ILL fines, fees, and privileges refers to our patrons obtaining ILLs from other libraries. So if you interlibrary loan something and you damage their materials, you would still be subject to the other library's fines and fees. And on the flip side, if you as a reciprocal borrower, you, Marjorie, if you went to Downers Grove as a reciprocal, you
Okay.
could go there
I
and
got
check materials as, physical materials from Downers Grove, and then you would still be subject to. So,
Okay,
So it's just a question of whether the material's coming through the Lisle Library District or if it's at that own
I see.
library. Okay,
gotcha. Thank you.
okay, good. Okay, so then we'll move that forward to the next board meeting as well. So then we are moving on to number 8, LLD loan periods policy 315 draft discussion, because that ties in with the policy that we just talked about. It's just removing the fines from the chart. Am I correct on that,
correct.
Director Weinstein?
Reflects everything that was in the previous policy.
Okay, because we just revised this policy. We talked about it at our last meeting, I guess, in February, because it was revised at the May 13th, 2020 board meeting. So that's when we talked about the length of time and renewable and things like that, and how many like video games someone could check out and things like that. So this is just, nothing has changed on it with the exception of really removing the whole fines column. And otherwise it's the same. So are we good with putting this one forward then, just to reflect the fine-free policy?
Yes.
Yes. Trustee Duffy? Okay. All right, so that one will move forward as well. So I think our meeting next Wednesday is going to be really busy, isn't it, President Hummel? Okay. Number 9 on the agenda is community outreach discussion.
Okay, so in February, we talked about, and again, pre-pandemic, and anybody please correct me, but I rewatched the video. We talked about creating a survey of sorts to poll the public again. But again, pre-pandemic and working with CCS on a number of facility options. Right now we have facility options on our agenda at every board meeting. And then next we're going to be looking at an RFQ process for a designer. And but it was discussed about touching base with the community again. And I just want to make mention that I don't think we can do another scientific survey. And I'm using that term very literally because that's cost prohibitive. That's what we did at the community engagement. But we could do like a self-addressed postcard survey. Those are 40 cents a card, I believe. Or we can do an online survey, but that could be engineered easily.
Mm-hmm.
People who have an agenda. And so this was just a discussion item. We put it to, I think it came to personal policy because we were discussing how to word something like this. Because we're all wordsmiths and we are creating policy here. That's why it came to this policy. But again, we are having a lot of discussion about facility options at our regular board meetings, kind of committee the whole type discussion. So I'm not sure. It's up to you. We could take all the info we collected. Again, the community surveys was about 3 years ago, but we have had some interesting feedback during COVID. And we can instill some best practices regarding like the pandemic procedures we put in place, and then take the information that we gleaned from CCS. We went through kind of a walkthrough process with them originally. Or we can just move this agenda item to our next board meeting and discuss what we want to do. I don't know. I know that Chairwoman Swistek wanted this on the agenda because we did kind of leave this hanging.
Mm-hmm. So yes, I wanted it on the agenda because we had, as Director Weinstein said, left it hanging after our last meeting in February, and we said that we would come back to it. And then, the pandemic hit and things have kind of changed. So I wanted, to make sure that the committee knew that I hadn't forgotten about the fact that we were talking about it. But I personally feel like this would be something that we should discuss as a whole board in the future, just kind of in tandem with everything else that's going on, to see, you know, how we see this would fit into the process that we're in right now, especially with everything with CCS and the potential changes. I don't know how the rest of the committee feels about it.
This is Vice President Bartelli. I totally agree with you, Emily. I think, you know, as you said, with the current pandemic, our focus has shifted, and in concurrence with the CCS project, I really think we'd have to define the purpose of doing it at this time. And I prefer to wait and also bring it to the full board.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Duffy?
I agree with Vice President Bartelli, but because I'm going to pull that thread a little bit more. When I look at this kind of survey, what we do lack as an institution is a true customer satisfaction survey that is done systematic and repeated every couple of years. And the reason why you want to do that is that way you can track trends over time of how your customers, i.e. our patrons and the community, perceives the services, the facility, the programs, the board, whatever you want to call it. And having something where we should spend the time, I think this is what Vice President Bartelli, if I can put words in your mouth here, is talking about is we should spend the time as to developing a comprehensive survey. Doesn't need to be huge. When I say comprehensive, it can be relatively shortish for what a survey should be, but that addresses both elements that we're always looking at for a facility, elements that we're always looking at for services, and we can deploy that every couple of years. And that way, over a 10-year span, you can track how you're doing in meeting the patron's needs, right? I think that's ultimately what kind of the goal is of this, and give us direction. That's kind of my feeling. I think we should do it. I just think we should spend the time as to defining exactly what we want within that survey and what its purpose is, and not just have an ad hoc survey.
I think that's a good point. That would be something that, you know, that could help us with, you know, just to kind of check in with the community again, without it being a large community engagement process like was done. Actually, that was right before I joined the board, I think. That, you know, that we could be having these surveys go out every, you know, couple of years, that we could be getting some feedback to help us. And then if we needed to do a larger scale one at some point again too, that's definitely a possibility. President Hummel?
No, I agree with Vice President Bartelli, and then the Trustee Duffy's point. I'm definitely open to what he just mentioned. I know we do get what do you would call it? Yeah, community feedback cards. They used to be the green cards. I know there's it's a binder above what we used to have our. What was that?
Cards, and yeah, those are yeah, they're comment cards for people who enter the building. You froze up.
Yeah. So I like how I'm froze, and I can see it. It's I love where I'm frozen up at. But but it's no, I mean, we do have the comment cards, but it's something we could expand on maybe going forward. That's worth discussing. But in the meantime, I do agree with Vice President Bartelli. I think we should probably wait, see where we're going with the facility, or what we want to determine what we want to do with the facility, and then probably get full board input first, but that's all I have. And hopefully I unfreeze here pretty soon.
Well, I
Okay.
will mention just tail end of trustee Duffy's point, doing it every 2 years, I think that's something that we could still fold into our strategic plan, because our strategic plan is 3 years under the awareness umbrella. And maybe, we could look at it later this year and start like kind of crafting it, or budget it into next fiscal year. I think we're still in that strategic plan mode, perhaps. But if we are going to do it and make it kind of legit, it's got to be done by a third party, so that it's quote unquote a scientific survey and not something that, that's up to the board if they want to go that route. But that's something I would recommend that a third party take care of for us. And it may not be as large as the community engagement in terms of, having focus groups and then having large meetings and this and that. It could be strictly online and a little less money with less questions, but still be a scientific survey where our hands are off that process, although we do create questions.
You bring up some good points. I think what I would say is that maybe that could be part of the discussion. I've been part of, from a professional sense, the development of customer satisfaction surveys that have been developed and deployed internally versus third party. And if done well, it's fine, right? It's more of, and I totally get why people do third party. Usually you do third party because they have access to industry comparisons. So you get to see how you compare to every other library in certain questions. Now, if that is out there, listen, as the data person I am, of course, that has a lot of fascination to me to see how we compare. But that's always, that's a, crawl, walk, run, right? You won't need to get to that point right away. If we could just get a nice foundation and do it via like a Survey Monkey, and it doesn't cost any money, but we at least have a base foundation that can be repeated and systematic, that can have a lot of benefit to future iterations of this board, because then you can kind of see over time how you've improved with your customers.
We've done Survey Monkey before. We didn't go that route with our community engagement because we didn't want there to be people who game the system, because you can, using something like Survey Monkey. And when we went third party, they ensured, and I forgot the term they used, to avoid duplicate, like people answering the survey 5 times or whatever. But no, I've been happy with Survey Monkey. It helps when you can factor in a percentage of dupes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just may I add, I think we need to differentiate between the satisfaction survey versus what our engagement survey. To me, what we were looking for in that partially was what the residents wanted to see new, changed. I'm not saying it's not needed, but the amount of money that we spent on that engagement survey, which was and well worth it, I don't want to duplicate once again. It's never bad to update those, but if this is a true satisfaction survey, I agree with Trustee Duffy. Comparing us to surrounding libraries, what we do good, what we could do better, things like that, more so than things the residents want. If there's some way to differentiate between the two, that's my opinion. Thanks.
Usually what you'll see, Vice President Bartelli, is you have like let's say a survey's 20 questions. 10 of those questions are always kind of like that core satisfaction. I'll use the term satisfaction, but loosely, just for argument's sake. But then to your other questions, like the things that you may be interested in that year. Those other 10 or 5 questions, that's where you can flavor and color those all you want. Sort of like if you're getting at, oh, hey, what do you feel about moving the library downtown? That could be a question that you would put on a survey if you wanted to. Or what do you feel about more online programs versus in person? Those are things that maybe just are pertaining to that point in time versus something else, but you can combine them. The key is you just have to have the core survey questions that are never touched really, so that way over time you can track those trends. But I completely agree with you.
Okay.
Okay, so are we good with kind of pushing this back to the whole board as something that we would talk about in the future doing and kind of remove it from our committee?
Yeah.
All right, awesome. So we will do that. Okay, item 10 on the agenda is director evaluation draft discussion. So we've been talking about this for a while, that we were going to be working on a new performance review or evaluation process for the director. And in my research that I've been doing and looking at different library director evaluation, just documentation, I saw a lot of, I saw some policies and I saw some performance reviews that tied in the library director's job description into that. And then I realized I hadn't seen the library director's job description, and I thought maybe we should see that and see if there's a way that we can tie that into the performance evaluation for the director of the library. And in your packet, there's the chapter 8 from, I don't remember the name of that book. What was the name of that book, Tatiana?
Trustee fact file.
The trustee facts files, which we should all have a copy of, but this is chapter 8, and this is the one that really refers to our job as the board as far as the library director, and it had an example of job responsibilities, and then it talks about performance evaluations, and then on page 44 of the packet, which is page 43 of the book. So on the bottom of the page, it says 44, and on the top of the page, it says 43. It talks about setting goals. And in the middle of that, do you see that?
No.
At the bottom of the page, it says 44 at the bottom of the page, and the top of the page says 43, because it was 43 in the actual manual.
Thank you.
And then, okay. So on page 44, near the top, there's the bold setting goals. And it talks about factors for performance evaluation. And it mentioned the job description. So performance of the director as evaluated according to the written job description, objectives, the director's progress carrying out previously identified objectives in conjunction with specific long-range goals, and then leadership, the success of the library in carrying out service programs under the leadership of the director. And so, you know, reading this too, I thought, okay, yes, we do need to make sure that our evaluation of the director ties into the job description, and then the objectives and the long-range goals we talked before about with our strategic plan, and how we could work that into the goals of the director. And so I really wanted to make sure that we were, as a committee, looking at all of this information here. And then there were some links in the email that took you to some different examples of ones that are on the internet to kind of see for other examples as well. One of the things that, you know, we had talked about at our last meeting too was about I think there was some conversation about trustees and with our responsibility with the staff of the library. And I thought it was important on the next page where it talks about how the board works directly with the library director, and then the director is the one who works with the staff, not us. And so we're not involved in that process. And I thought, that was important to review as well. And I don't know if you've all had a chance to read that chapter or not, or look at the other examples, but I wanted this to kind of be a starting point for us. And if we're not really ready to start flushing something out, I'm okay with that. We have some time. The final page of the packet is the sample that Trustee Duffy had told us that at the last meeting that he would send out to us. And he was going to talk us through that just as kind of an example of something that he has worked with before and that he had said that he would share with us. So I'm going to turn it over to Trustee Duffy right now just so he can talk about that, and then we'll kind of open it up for some discussion.
Okay, so I know it looks a little bare, but I had to remove all of this is the content of my evaluation. So how to read this is...
Excuse me, Tom, I'm sorry. Could you tell me which?
It's going to be the very last page, page 47.
It looks like this, Marjorie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So what this is sort of an outline of how you would structure a larger evaluation form, but you would just repeat this section for each one. And in essence, the director would have 3 to 5 goals, tying back to what you just talked about, Secretary Swistak, about goals within a performance evaluation. The goals, let's say there are 5 goals. Some of those goals are set by the board. So the board has a discussion about what is it that we want the library to do this year. And we set 1 to 3 of them. And then the director sets the remaining. Maybe there's 2 to 3 additional ones. What happens though is, not every year you're going to meet every goal, right? Like things happen like a pandemic or, so it's what you do is you then have to weight the goals. So, and again, they have to equal 100%. So maybe we have a goal would be to successfully pursue a library renovation with successful completion by X date, right? Like that, off the top of my head. Well, that's probably like a 40% weighted goal, right? Pretty big thing. Or there could be other goals that are smaller, but it would have a smaller weight. The key though is why you do that is you don't, for the staff, for the director or any staff member, let's say they, out of 5 goals, they only can meet 4, but even meeting those 4 goals means that they met 80% of their total weight for that year. So they actually had a very successful year. Maybe they just couldn't meet that 5th goal for a variety of reasons. The key though is all these goals you have to put on paper of how they align to the strategic plan. Because I think like when I read the library director's job description, or let's say lack thereof, because it doesn't read as because in essence, the director to me is an executive officer. That is what you're running a multi-million-dollar entity. And your goals as the executive align to the strategic plan. And that is what you should be getting held to in that execution. So, what would happen is at the end of the year, the director would say, okay, I met this goal. I give myself rating of a 4 out of 5, and here's how I met this goal, or here's how I came close to meeting the goal. And then the board, when during our evaluation, would then go, okay, you gave yourself a 4. We actually view this as a 3, but here's the reasons why. And then you have that fully documented. But it to me, I like this system because I know we've had a lot of discussion about how do you actually tie goals to strategic priorities, and what is the role of the executive, i.e. director, in that. And I think it provides for a staff member a clear line of sight. Because I imagine when you don't have like specific goals, what happens is you write a lot of stuff on a sheet of paper and you did a lot of great work, right? But you don't know what you're supposed to put down because you don't know exactly what you were tied to in your performance evaluation. I'll stop there. I know it's a little complicated, but I think that that's what I've seen has worked in my professional, and I get that this is not a professional, like this is, you know what I mean, right? So it's a little bit different. So I'll stop there.
I appreciate you taking the time to explain that to us, Trustee Duffy. And and I think that this is something that is going to take us some time to really to really flesh out. The first step that I would like to do, and that I as the chair of this committee would like to work on with the director, is kind of revisiting the library director's job description and kind of making a new draft of that to bring forth to our next personnel and policy committee meeting, whenever that is, so that we can kind of get this to really more up to date and in sync with how things are now, and then leading that into and tying that into then the performance evaluation and looking at that. And I like Trustee Duffy's point about having board determined goals and then also director determined goals to work in concert together, for the future. I feel like, this is something that, we've kind of talked about as a board, for the past 3 years since I've been on it. And we hadn't really gone anywhere with it. And we were hoping to get this in place before the new fiscal year, and then the pandemic happened. And so things have really been in flux. But I don't want to give up on it. It's not something that I want to just say, okay, forget it, and we're not going to spend time on it. It's something that I feel is important, just to make sure that everything is clear as far as what we're expecting of the director and what the director is expecting of us as a board to do as far as, giving that performance evaluation. So again, it's not going to apply to the evaluation that we have still to do for her for this year. But I'm hopeful that it's something that we will be able to get in place in the relatively near future, maybe by the end of this calendar year, if we're lucky, and we're working hard on that. But that's kind of where I'm at as well. One of the other things that I had seen in my research is that there are some libraries that have performance evaluation procedures for the director, and they really kind of spelled out a timeline about when things would happen, where things were discussed. So if they had a certain committee that did things, the roles of the trustees in it. There was some that I saw that had each trustee would fill out a document about how they feel that the director has done, and then there's a designee who tabulates all the information together, and then that helps lead the discussion for the committee or for the board in working on the performance evaluation, in whole, with getting feedback from the director and all of that. And so that's kind of where I'm hoping to go, is to get it to be a more just structured a structured procedure or policy that we haven't had yet, to make it more effective and efficient for the director and for the board. So I don't know if anyone has any other comments about that right now, or what you're thinking. If you're okay with me, discussing with the director about, trying to work on a new job description that we can review then as a committee and work towards, tying this performance review into that as well. I want to know what everyone's thoughts are.
I'll jump in. When you're talking about the job description,
Oh, you're frozen again. Okay,
yeah,
go ahead.
I know. It looks like I'm missing an arm now.
But no, you're getting better at being frozen. Each time it's happened, it has improved.
But the last two were probably the most flattering. But anyway, but no, I'm glad you talked about the job description, because actually that was one of the things I was looking at, and that definitely needs to be updated. There's probably some outdated language or whatever on this too, I would say. So yeah, there's something we could probably, yeah, I don't know. I'm okay if you want to take the lead. I mean, probably eventually the whole full board will, take it
Absolutely.
a little bit, but but I definitely agree with it. Cause I was reading this, I'm like, yeah, it's probably something we need to update or change, or at least discuss. I mean, we can maybe keep some
Mhm.
things, but maybe discuss it. So I'm glad with that. And then just to keep, I mean, I know the guideline of this thing, that the director review that trustee Duffy provided. I know that a good template that we could work on. And then just to keep it short, I mean, I pretty much agree with most of what you said, Secretary.
Okay, thank you. Vice President Bartelli?
I agree with everything you have said, Emily. It's a good process. I'm just wondering, and I don't know that this is a good idea, so I'm thinking out loud. I'm
Mhm.
learning from Trustee Duffy how to. Would it help at all? And I don't want to open this can of worms, to get just if we could set 3 items, 5 items. If we provided the materials that we received, I did read all of these different examples of what
Mhm.
an evaluation should consist of.
Mhm.
I found it extremely informative, things I
Mhm.
hadn't even thought of.
Yep.
Would it, again, don't want to create a monster here. Would it be helpful to get the full board's input on, let's say, maximum, if we provide them with this information, maximum 5 items that they feel are the most important? I realize you're therefore eliminating some other maybe important items.
Mhm.
But would it give you any kind of a basis as where this board is coming from? Or should that not even play into it?
Are you, are
the
you
board's
talking about, are you talking about 5 like goals that each
well,
individual board member has, or what are you talking about the 5?
well, maybe, I'm sorry, not the information that we got on the actual evaluations, but
Okay.
um, the actual job description, that the current one
Okay.
that we have. Would it behoove us to elicit any kind of comments on what it
What,
lacks, what it needs? Again, we don't want to open up a
well,
can of.
what I would like to do first is work with the director and kind of talk through it, and
Okay.
then provide a draft to our committee first, and
Okay.
then send it to the whole board to say, okay, what are your thoughts? But because I feel like, just based on the experience that we've had the past year and a half with this committee, is that we work well together in editing and drafting and all of that, and then taking it to the whole board. And I feel like if I can work on a draft with the director, and then we can put it to the committee, and then the committee can discuss it, and then we can put it to the full board, I just feel like that might help us to get through it, as opposed to 7 different people
Right.
coming
No,
in.
you're right. That's why. Yeah.
And that's what I'm kind of asking for, is that, are we okay with that at this stage in the game?
Yes, I am okay with that.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
I'm okay with it. I think I think we're maybe Vice President Martelli was getting to, because eventually probably we are going to definitely have to have like full board to kick it
Sure.
around. So I think you were just, how did you want to go about it? Like put the full board, at least give you some feedback, then do it, and then still the full board, or just wait till the end for the full board. So I'm okay with either way, but I mean, the way you want to do it it sounds good. I'm definitely okay with it. I agree with what you said.
And really, I mean, at this point, one of the reasons why I would like to do it this way is just because we're still in this position where we're meeting virtually, and it's just it's a challenge, and I feel like it would be easier to do the smaller to the bigger than the bigger and then try to go down.
Agree.
Trustee Duffy?
I mean, I'm not going to disagree with Vice President Bartelli on a spite, so I agree. We can
Okay. Okay. All right, so that's where we're at with that. Did anyone have any other items that they would like to discuss, or are we set and someone would like a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn. This is Trustee Duffy.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I will second the motion. Vice President Bartelli?
Okay, so I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, we are adjourned at 8:40 p.m.
You have to do,
I think, do we have to take a roll call, Tatiana, on that?
yes, you have to do a roll
On
call.
roll call?
Oh, sorry, roll
Maybe
call.
I do that. That's okay.
Sorry, vote, please, roll call. Ah,
Duffy. Thomas Duffy,
Aye.
Marjorie Bartelli,
Aye.
Thomas Hummel,
Aye.
Emily Swistek,
aye. Okay,
Tatiana Meyer.
motion, oh, sorry. Okay, motion passes and we are adjourned at 8:41 p.m. Thank you very much.